The first time my son called me a loser, it wasn't in private. It was at a crowded barbecue. Friends, neighbors, people from my wife's social circle. He looked straight at me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why do you even try? You're just a loser." Someone laughed. Someone else said, "Kids say the funniest things." I waited for my wife to step in. She didn't. She stood there smiling, pregnant, glowing, like nothing was wrong. Later that night, when I told her it bothered me, she sighed and said, "You're reading too much into it. He's a child." But that's the thing no one talks about. Kids don't invent contempt. They learn it. And once I started replaying that moment in my head, I noticed something else. My son didn't talk to me like that when we were alone. He talked to me like someone had been rehearsing him. That night, lying in bed beside my wife, I realized I hadn't lost my authority recently. I'd lost it a long time ago. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a husband. Stopped being a father. I became the thing everyone used and quietly resented. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I stopped trying to fix things. And I started digging. I wish I could say that moment at the barbecue was an accident. That my son had just blurted something out without thinking. But the more I replayed it, the clearer it became that it wasn't spontaneous at all. After he called me a loser, he didn't look confused. He didn't look scared. He didn't even look angry. He looked confident. Like he knew there would be no consequences. When the laughter died down, he didn't apologize. He didn't look at me again. He walked straight past me and went to my wife, Vanessa. She bent down, brushed his hair back, and whispered something to him that made him smile. That smile stuck with me. On the drive home, I tried to talk about it calmly. I told her it hurt. That it crossed a line. That something about it didn't feel normal. She didn't even turn her head. "You're making it weird," she said. "He's a kid. Stop taking everything so personally." That word, personally, kept echoing in my head. Because what else was it supposed to be? Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had ignored for years. The way my son listened to her instantly, but rolled his eyes when I asked him to do something simple. The way he talked about real men being confident, strong, respected, words I had never used around him. The way he compared me to people I didn't know. "You wouldn't get it," he told me once, when I asked who taught him that phrase. "Mom says you're just different." Different. That was how it started. Not with shouting. Not with violence. With quiet, casual erosion. At home, I wasn't included in decisions anymore. School activities were planned without telling me. Dinners happened before I got home from Redwood Trust Bank, where I worked long hours managing products that paid for every luxury in that house. The elite gym. The spa packages. The social club memberships. All of it came out of my account. Yet somehow, I felt like a guest. What hurt the most wasn't the disrespect. It was the certainty behind it. My son spoke to me the way adults do when they've already decided who you are. Not with curiosity. Not with confusion. With judgment. One evening, I overheard Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen. She lowered her voice when she noticed me, but not before I caught a few words. "He's not a bad person," she said. "He just doesn't know how to be a man." She laughed softly. I stood there, frozen, realizing something far worse than being insulted. I wasn't just being disrespected inside my home. I was being rewritten. Someone had already told my story for me, and it wasn't flattering. By the end of that week, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. Contempt doesn't appear overnight. It's planted. Watered. Repeated. And once it grows, it doesn't stop at words. That's when I stopped asking myself why my son didn't respect me, and started asking who was teaching him not to. Before everything went wrong, my life looked stable from the outside. I worked at Redwood Trust Bank as a product manager, the kind of job people describe as secure. The pay was good, good enough that I never had to think twice about bills, and the benefits were solid. Health insurance, retirement contributions, bonuses that came quietly and on time. I didn't chase status. I chased predictability. Vanessa used to say she loved that about me. We met in our late 20s, when I was just starting to find my footing, and she was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. She had energy, ambition, at least that's what I thought at the time, and a way of making people feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. I believed we balanced each other. Somewhere along the way, that balance shifted. Vanessa decided she didn't want a regular life. She wanted experiences. Social circles. Places where people recognized her. I told myself that was normal. Everyone grows differently. I adjusted my expectations instead of questioning hers. When our son was born, I leaned harder into work. Not because I wanted to escape home, but because I thought providing was the most important thing I could do. I told myself that being reliable mattered more than being exciting. My mother thought differently. She never liked how invisible I became in my own house. She'd watched the way Vanessa spoke over me, how decisions were made without my input, and later she'd pull me aside and ask if everything was okay. "She doesn't mean anything by it," I'd say. "That's just how she is." My mother would nod, but she never looked convinced. As the years passed, Vanessa's lifestyle grew sharper at the edges. Elite gym memberships. Spas that charged more per visit than my mother spent on groceries in a month. Social clubs where I was technically welcome but never invited. I paid for all of it. Not because she demanded it outright, but because it was expected. Because questioning it meant conflict. And I had convinced myself that peace was worth the cost. At home, my role narrowed. I became the one who handled logistics. School payments. Insurance forms. Mortgage paperwork. I was efficient. Quiet. Replaceable. Our son learned quickly who set the tone in the house. When Vanessa spoke, he listened. When I spoke, he negotiated. At first it was small things, ignoring instructions, dismissive replies. I told myself it was just a phase. Kids test boundaries. That's what they do. But looking back, I can see how carefully that phase was guided. I wasn't absent. I was present in the least visible way possible. I showed up with my wallet open and my opinions closed. And every time I tried to step back into the role of an equal, I was reminded, gently, smiling, that I was making things uncomfortable. By the time Vanessa became pregnant again, I had already faded into the background of my own marriage. The news should have brought us closer. Instead, it made everything feel more fragile. She talked about the future like I was a fixed resource. Not a partner. A given. I didn't realize then that while I was planning how to support a growing family, she was already imagining a life where I didn't exist at all. For a while, I tried to convince myself that I was the problem. That if I worked less, talked more, smiled more, things would reset on their own. I replayed conversations in my head late at night, wondering where I had missed a turn. I asked myself whether I had become boring, predictable, too safe. Vanessa noticed the change in me before I understood it myself. "You've been acting strange," she said one evening while scrolling through her phone. "You okay?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I felt like a guest in my own life. Instead, I nodded and told her I was tired. The truth was, I didn't know what I was reacting to yet. I just knew something fundamental had shifted, and I didn't have the language for it. I watched my son more closely after that. Not in a paranoid way, at least not at first. I noticed how quickly his mood changed depending on who was in the room. How confident he became when Vanessa was around. How dismissive he grew when it was just us. One night, I asked him why he thought I was a loser. He shrugged without looking up from his tablet. "Mom says you worry too much." That answer didn't hurt the way the barbecue insult had. It hurt more. Because it wasn't anger. It was repetition. I started losing sleep. Lying awake beside Vanessa, listening to her breathe, wondering how two people could share a bed and still feel so far apart. I'd stare at the ceiling and mentally retrace the last decade of my life, looking for a moment where everything began to go wrong. Maybe it was when I stopped pushing back. Maybe it was when I decided being dependable mattered more than being respected. I questioned my own memories. Conversations that once felt normal suddenly felt edited. Like I had only been allowed to see the parts that kept me compliant. At work, I went through the motions. Meetings blurred together. Colleagues asked if I was okay. I told them I was fine because I didn't know how to explain that I felt like I was slowly being erased from my own story. Even my mother noticed. She asked if I was eating enough. If work was stressing me out. If everything at home was all right. I lied to her. I didn't want to admit that I didn't understand my own marriage anymore. That the woman I had built my life around seemed to exist in a parallel reality, one where I was necessary, but never valued. What scared me most wasn't the disrespect. It was how normal it had all become. There was no explosion. No obvious betrayal. Just a steady drip of moments that made me smaller. Moments I was expected to ignore. Moments I was told to stop taking personally. And then there were the quiet gaps. Times when Vanessa would leave early and come back glowing, energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. Times when my son talked about places I'd never been, people I'd never met, experiences that didn't include me. When I asked questions, I was told I was imagining things. "You're reading into it again," Vanessa said once, annoyed. "Why do you always assume the worst?" That was when it hit me. If I was wrong, if I truly was paranoid, then I was losing my grip on reality. And if I was right, then something much darker was happening right under my nose. Either way, I couldn't stay in that space anymore. I didn't know what the truth was yet. I only knew that pretending everything was fine was slowly breaking me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been avoiding. What if this wasn't confusion? What if this was the early stage of something intentional? I didn't hire anyone because I wanted revenge. I did it because I needed to know whether I was losing my mind. I started small. Bank statements. Credit card summaries. Subscriptions I hadn't looked at in years. At first glance, everything looked normal, nothing screaming fraud, nothing dramatic enough to justify the knot in my chest. But patterns don't announce themselves. They repeat quietly. There were charges I didn't recognize, tied to places I had never been. Restaurants during work hours. Weekend expenses logged miles away from where I thought my family was. Membership add-ons I didn't remember approving. When I asked Vanessa about one of them, she didn't hesitate. "Oh, that's just a guest pass thing. It's cheaper if you bundle it." She smiled when she said it. Casual. Practiced. That was when I understood something important. If she was lying, she was comfortable doing it. A few days later, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I contacted a private investigator. Not one of the dramatic ones from movies, just a quiet professional with a clean website and a long wait list. When I told him I wanted background, expenses, movement patterns, he raised an eyebrow. "Spouse?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He didn't ask anything else. Just sent over a contract and an invoice. The first report came back faster than I expected. It wasn't explosive. No photos yet. No names. Just timelines. Times when Vanessa said she was at the gym, but wasn't. Errands that took hours longer than necessary. Regular gaps that lined up with the same days every week. The investigator flagged one location in particular. A neighborhood across town. Not fancy. Not cheap either. Residential. Predictable. Then came the photos. She wasn't alone. The man with her wasn't subtle. He acted like he belonged. Like he'd been around for a while. In one picture, my son ran ahead of them, laughing, turning back to show him something on his phone. The man bent down, listened, and ruffled his hair. That image hit harder than anything else. Because my son didn't act like that with strangers. The investigator's next update filled in what my mind had already started piecing together. The man had been around longer than I wanted to admit. Long enough to be familiar. Long enough to be comfortable. Long enough to feel permanent. Then the financial layer surfaced. Expenses I had assumed were for my family were being duplicated elsewhere. Meals for 3. Activity fees. Clothing purchases that never made it into our house. It wasn't reckless spending. It was organized. There was another life running parallel to mine, and I was funding both. The investigator hesitated before sending the final attachment. It was a timeline. And it went back further than I expected. The affair didn't start recently. It didn't start after stress. It didn't start because we grew apart. It started early enough that it couldn't be explained away as a mistake. When I asked him, quietly, if he was sure, he replied with one sentence that still echoes in my head. I don't usually say this, but this has been going on a long time. That same week, my lawyer confirmed what the investigator couldn't. Vanessa had consulted a divorce attorney months ago. Quietly. Strategically. There were notes about timing, benefits, custody optics. Pregnancy was mentioned more than once. She wasn't reacting to unhappiness. She was preparing an exit. By the time I sat alone in my car, staring at the steering wheel instead of driving home, the picture was finally clear. I hadn't been drifting apart from my wife. I had been replaced, slowly, deliberately, and with my own resources. And the worst part wasn't the affair. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the planning. It was the realization that everyone around me already knew who I was supposed to be in this story. The obstacle. The provider. The man who wouldn't notice until it was too late. They were wrong about one thing. I had noticed. And now that I knew the truth, I understood something else just as clearly. Whatever happened next couldn't be emotional. And it couldn't be rushed. Because if I moved the wrong way even once, I wouldn't just lose my marriage. I would lose everything. Once the shock wore off, something colder took its place. I stopped asking why. Why she did it. Why she hated me. Why I hadn't seen it sooner. Those questions didn't protect anything. So I did what I'd always been good at, planning. I didn't confront Vanessa. Not even once. I treated her the same way I always had. I listened. I nodded. I paid attention. If anything, I became easier to live with. Less suspicious. Less reactive. She relaxed. People always do when they think they've won. I met with a lawyer quietly, during lunch breaks and early mornings. I didn't tell him about the affair first. I told him about the timeline. The pregnancy. The benefits. The house. The accounts. He listened without interrupting, then leaned back and said something that stuck with me. If you show emotion too early, you lose leverage. He explained how quickly things could go wrong. How assets could be frozen. How a single argument could be reframed as intimidation. How sympathy almost always sided with the pregnant spouse. Right now, he said, you don't look like the villain. But that can change fast. So we built a sequence instead of a confrontation. The first step was separation, quiet, invisible separation. I opened new accounts in my name only and began moving my income there the moment it landed. Joint savings followed, slowly, in amounts small enough not to trigger alarms. I kept records of everything. Dates. Times. Justifications. The house was next. That decision didn't come easily. It was the only real asset we had, and it was tied to more than money. It was where my mother visited every week. Where she helped with my son. Where she believed our family still existed. When I told her I needed to transfer the property temporarily, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Do what you need to do. I trust you." That was the moment I almost broke. But trust was a resource I couldn't afford to waste. At home, Vanessa started talking more about the future. Not our future. Hers. The baby. Schools. Plans that didn't include my opinion. She spoke like everything was settled, like I was a background detail that would be handled later. I let her talk. I even agreed with her sometimes. Inside, I was already gone. I reviewed my benefits package at Redwood Trust Bank line by line. Health coverage. Dependents. Emergency provisions. What could be changed instantly, and what required documentation. Everything had rules. Rules meant predictability. Meanwhile, the investigator continued working quietly. Digging into the man who had stepped into my life without permission. His job. His social circle. His habits. He was reckless. Affairs weren't new to him. Neither were married women. His employer cared about reputation. His social club cared about appearances. Both relied on the illusion of discretion. Illusions don't survive evidence. By the time I sat alone one night, organizing files on my laptop, financial records, timelines, legal notes, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was focused. Vanessa thought she was planning an exit. By the time everything was in motion, my life had split cleanly into two lanes. In one lane, nothing changed. I still came home on time. Still asked how her day was. Still nodded through conversations about doctor visits, baby names, and plans she spoke about as if I were a temporary inconvenience instead of a husband. Vanessa had no idea the ground underneath her was already hollow. In the other lane, everything was precise. My lawyer stopped using hypotheticals and started using dates. "Once papers are filed," he said, tapping the desk, "your window closes. Anything not protected by then becomes leverage, for her." So we locked the leverage first. The accounts were already separated, but now everything was documented. Clean. Boring. Impossible to challenge. My income no longer touched anything with her name on it. Joint savings were accounted for, justified, and secured. Then came the house. I tired explaining my mother why the transfer had to happen before anything became official. When I finished, she didn't ask if I was sure. She asked the same thing again, "I trust you?" That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The paperwork moved fast after that. Title changes don't make noise. They don't send alerts. They don't announce themselves to people who assume ownership is permanent. Vanessa still talked about the house like it was her safety net. "If things ever got bad," she said once, casually, "at least we'd have equity." I agreed with her. Inside, I already knew she wouldn't touch a dollar of it. The benefits review came next. At Redwood Trust Bank, everything is policy-driven. There's no emotion in forms, no sympathy in checkboxes. Dependents are dependents until they aren't. Coverage exists until it doesn't. I learned exactly what required notice, and what didn't. I didn't remove anything yet. Timing mattered. Meanwhile, the investigator finished his work on the man she thought had replaced me. The report wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was just pattern after pattern, laid out cleanly. Married women. Overlapping relationships. A reputation that survived only because no one had bothered to connect the dots. His job relied on discretion. His social club relied on image. Both collapsed under documentation. I told my lawyer when I wanted the papers served. Not immediately. I wanted her calm. I wanted her confident. I wanted her walking into that process believing she was about to win. Because the thing people don't understand about betrayal is this. It isn't painful when it's exposed. It's painful when it's undeniable. Vanessa was 8 months pregnant when she finally started talking openly about separation. Not angrily. Strategically. "I think we both know this isn't working," she said one night, like she was offering me a favor. "We should do this the right way. No drama." I looked at her and nodded. "No drama," I agreed. She smiled, relieved. That smile stayed with me. Because she had no idea that the version of the future she was preparing for no longer existed. She thought the house would protect her. She thought the money would cushion her. She thought the pregnancy would control the narrative. And she had no idea, none at all, that when she finally sat across from her lawyer, the first thing that would happen wasn't a negotiation. It would be silence. Vanessa walked into her lawyer's office confident. Not loud confident. Not cocky. The calm kind that comes from believing you've planned better than the other person. She told me later that she expected paperwork. A timeline. A discussion about custody and numbers. She thought the pregnancy would slow everything down. That sympathy would do part of the negotiating for her. Instead, her lawyer stopped flipping pages halfway through the file. "Give me a minute," he said. That was the first crack. She sat there, hands folded over her stomach, watching him read something again. Then again. He leaned back in his chair and asked a question that didn't sound the way she expected. "When did your husband transfer the property?" She frowned. "What property?" "The house," he said. "It's not listed as marital property." There was a pause long enough that even she noticed it. "That's not possible," she said. "We bought it together." Her lawyer turned the screen toward her and pointed. "It was transferred months ago. It's not in either of your names." She laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," he replied calmly. "It just doesn't help you." That was when the questions started coming faster. Where are the joint savings? Why are the balances this low? When did your access change? Vanessa tried to answer, but everything she said was built on assumptions. On what she thought was still hers. On money she believed existed because it always had before. Her lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her of anything. He just said, he moved first. By the time she left that office, the confidence was gone. She called me on the drive home. Not angry. Not crying. Careful. "What did you do with the house?" she asked. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I protected it." "That's not what this is," she snapped. "You can't just take everything." "I didn't take anything," I replied. "I just stopped assuming you'd be fair." That was the first time her voice cracked. "You knew," she said slowly. "You planned this." I didn't deny it. The next meeting was worse. This time, her lawyer explained the numbers out loud. What she might get. What she definitely wouldn't. How the timing worked against her. How pregnancy sympathy doesn't override documentation. She kept interrupting him. "But the house. But the savings. But his income. Each time, the answer was the same. Already moved. Already protected. Already accounted for. When she realized how little leverage she actually had, she did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She panicked. That panic followed her home. She asked about the health insurance that night, pretending it was casual. Asked what would happen if something went wrong with the pregnancy. Asked whether everything was still covered. I told her the truth. It's covered, I said. Just not through me anymore. She stared at me like she didn't understand the language. You can't do that, she said. I can, I replied. And I did. That was the moment the story she had been telling herself finally collapsed. The house wasn't a safety net. The money wasn't waiting for her. The pregnancy wasn't leverage. For the first time since I'd known her, Vanessa wasn't angry. She was afraid. And fear does something honesty never could. It makes people realize they were never in control to begin with. Vanessa didn't come to talk. She came to negotiate. That's how she walked into my apartment a few days later, measured, controlled, holding herself together like someone who still believed there was a version of this where she landed on her feet. She didn't cry at first. She started with logic. You've made your point, she said, sitting across from me. This has gone far enough. We can still do this clean. I let her talk. She mentioned custody. Mentioned schedules. Mentioned how hard things would be for our son if we kept escalating. Then she said the one thing she thought would slow me down. You don't have to destroy his life too. That was when I knew she still didn't understand. I reached into a folder on the table and slid a single document toward her. She glanced at it without interest at first. Then she read the header. Her face changed. She looked at me. Back at the paper. Then again at me. No, she said quietly. That's not. Read it, I said. She did. The room stayed silent while the meaning settled in. No percentages. No ambiguity. Just confirmation. Her hand started shaking before she even finished the page. You tested him, she whispered. I needed to know who I was protecting, I replied. Turns out, it wasn't him. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Then she said it, the sentence she probably thought would reset everything. You don't understand, she said, voice breaking. I was going to tell you. I laughed. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just once. You've been saying that since the day we got married. Her composure collapsed after that. She cried. Not the controlled kind. The panicked kind. The kind that comes when someone realizes the story they built their life on can't survive the truth. He doesn't even want me anymore, she said suddenly, like it had just occurred to her. He said this was too much. That I dragged him into chaos. I nodded. That tracks. She looked at me like she expected sympathy. He blamed me, she continued. Said I ruined his job. His reputation. Said he never promised me anything. Of course he didn't. Men like that never do. She moved closer, lowering her voice like intimacy might still work. My back is getting worse, she said. I don't have coverage. I can barely afford rent. I'm 8 months pregnant and I don't even know how I'm going to pay the hospital. I waited. You're really going to let this happen? She asked. After everything? That's when I gave her the line back. The exact one she used when I tried to talk to her. You're making it weird, I said calmly. Stop taking everything so personally. Her face crumpled. That's cruel, she said. No, I replied. That's memory. She tried one last time. She talked about our son. About school. About how confused he was. About how embarrassed he felt now that he wasn't going to the same private academy as his friends. "He cries," she said. "He doesn't understand why this is happening." I looked at her and said, "He learned how to talk to me from you." That was the moment she understood something else. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about custody or reputation. This was about consequences. She stood up slowly, like her body finally felt as heavy as her situation. "You planned this," she said. "You waited." "Yes," I replied. "Because you were counting on me not to." She left without another word. After that, the collapse finished itself. The boyfriend didn't come back. The job didn't magically reappear. The friends who once praised her independence stopped answering calls. People who build their lives on borrowed stability don't survive exposure. A few weeks later, she sent one final message. No accusations. No threats. Just 5 words. "I don't know what to do." I didn't respond. Because by then, everything that needed to be said had already been said. And everything that needed to be taken from me had already been returned. Life didn't suddenly become better. It became quieter. And at first, that quiet felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Like something bad was about to happen and just hadn't arrived yet. I kept waiting for the next crisis, the next call, the next demand. None came. My finances stabilized in a way they never had before. Not because I earned more, but because nothing was leaking anymore. For the first time in years, my money stayed where I put it. Savings grew without effort. Bills stopped feeling like punishment. I started paying attention to myself again. I went to the gym early in the mornings, not for status or image, but because moving my body felt grounding. I cooked simple meals. I read again. I slept through the night without waking up with my jaw clenched. At Redwood Trust Bank, my work felt different too. I wasn't distracted. I wasn't exhausted from managing 2 lives, mine and the one I was unknowingly funding. I did my job, did it well, and left it there. No chasing approval. No proving anything. A few months later, I almost skipped the college reunion. Old versions of myself made me uncomfortable. But I went anyway. That's where I saw Lauren Mitchell. She hadn't changed the way people in movies don't change. She'd changed the way people do when life has tested them and they survived anyway. Quieter. Sharper. More honest. We talked at first like 2 people being careful not to step on old memories. Professors. Dumb stories. How strange it felt to be back in the same room after so many years. Eventually, the conversation shifted. She told me about her divorce. No drama. No villain monologue. Just facts, boundaries, and lessons learned the hard way. She talked about trust the way someone does after it's been broken, without bitterness, but without illusions either. I told her a little about mine. Not everything. Just enough. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me I was strong or lucky or brave. She just said, "That kind of betrayal changes how you move through the world." She was right. We didn't rush anything after that. We stayed in touch. Coffee sometimes. Long walks. Conversations that ended when they were supposed to, not when one of us needed something. What mattered wasn't romance. It was recognition. She didn't need me to provide anything. I didn't need her to validate me. That alone felt different enough to be healing. I heard about Vanessa occasionally, through people who thought updates were neutral information. Life hadn't gone the way she planned. The version of herself she relied on didn't survive without someone else holding it up. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I felt distance. And distance, I learned, is a form of peace. These days, my mother visits often. We drink coffee. Talk about ordinary things. She never asks if I regret what I did. She doesn't need to. Because when I look at my life now, it isn't impressive. But it's stable. It's honest. And it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that's more than enough.